What if I told you that obsession isn't about attraction? It's about control. And what if I told you that someone is using these exact techniques on you right now? 3 texts. That's all it took for Sarah to completely rearrange her life around someone who barely knew she existed. But here's what's terrifying. It wasn't an accident. Every delayed response, every mixed signal, every moment of confusion was carefully calculated using psychological principles that date back centuries. If you've ever found yourself constantly checking your phone for one specific person, if you've ever felt that strange pull towards someone who seems just out of reach, then you need to understand what's really happening to your brain. Because what I'm about to show you will change how you see every relationship, every interaction, and every person who's ever made you question your own worth. But before we dive into the dark psychology that's been weaponized against you, hit that subscribe button, because this video is going to expose techniques so powerful that most people will never recover from learning them. And trust me, you'll want to remember everything I'm about to reveal. The human mind has 2 fundamental drives that control almost every decision we make. Most people think it's love and hate or pleasure and pain. They're wrong. The real drivers are love and fear, but there's something deeper lurking beneath both of these forces. Something that overrides logic, bypasses rational thinking, and takes complete control of behavior. Obsession. But here's where it gets twisted. Obsession isn't created by what someone gives you. It's engineered by what they deliberately withhold. And the people who understand this principle don't just stumble into it by accident. They study it, practice it, and use it with surgical precision. Think about the last time someone made you feel truly obsessed. I bet it wasn't when they were showering you with attention, was it? No, it was during those moments of uncertainty, those gaps in communication, those times when you couldn't quite figure out where you stood with them. Your brain was hijacked, and you didn't even know it was happening. The technique I'm about to reveal has its roots in political manipulation from the 1500s. A brilliant strategist discovered that the key to controlling powerful people wasn't through force or bribery, it was through emotional starvation. He would give kings and nobles just enough attention to make them crave more, then withdraw it at the exact moment they started to feel secure. But what does this have to do with modern relationships? Everything. The same neural pathways that made medieval rulers desperate for approval are the exact same ones being triggered in your brain right now. When someone creates uncertainty about their feelings, your mind enters what psychologists call a prediction error state. Your brain literally cannot rest until it solves the puzzle of where you stand with them. And here's the truly disturbing part. This isn't just happening naturally. There are people who study these techniques and use them deliberately to create emotional dependency in others. Let me tell you about intermittent reinforcement. This is the psychological principle that makes gambling so addictive. And it's being used on you in your relationships right now. When someone gives you attention sporadically, warm one day, cold the next, responsive sometimes, distant others, they're creating the exact same brain chemistry as a slot machine. Your dopamine system becomes hijacked. You start checking your phone compulsively. You reread their messages looking for hidden meanings. You analyze every interaction, trying to figure out the pattern. But here's the cruel truth. There is no pattern. The randomness is the point. Comment below if this is starting to sound familiar, because what I'm about to reveal next will show you exactly how to recognize when someone is using these techniques on you. But first, let me ask you something that might make you uncomfortable. Have you ever noticed how the people you obsess over seem to understand your deepest insecurities? How they seem to be the only ones who truly get you? That's not a coincidence. The most dangerous manipulators don't create your emotional wounds. They simply become the only person who seems to understand them. They position themselves not as a person, but as a solution to pain you didn't even realize you were carrying. They listen without trying to fix you. They acknowledge your struggles without judgment. They see the parts of yourself that you try to hide from everyone else. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, they become the only place where you feel truly understood. But here's the trap. They never actually heal your wounds. They just make you believe that being around them is the only time the pain stops. You become addicted, not to them, but to the relief from your own insecurities that you only feel in their presence. This is emotional dependency disguised as connection, and it's one of the most powerful forms of psychological control ever discovered. Now, I want you to think about someone who's had this effect on you. Someone who made you question everything about yourself, who had you constantly wondering where you stood with them. I'm going to show you the exact techniques they used to get inside your head and why your brain had no choice but to become obsessed. The first technique is called strategic absence. Most people think that being present and available creates connection. They're dead wrong. Availability creates comfort, and comfort kills curiosity. The human brain is wired to pay attention to what's unpredictable, what's scarce, what might disappear at any moment. When someone becomes strategically unavailable, not all the time, but just enough to create uncertainty, your brain activates the same neural circuits that helped our ancestors survive. We're programmed to pay intense attention to resources that might vanish, whether that's food, safety, or social connection. Your obsession isn't a character flaw, it's your survival instincts being weaponized against you. But it gets worse. The second technique is called fractured mirroring. Normal mirroring is when someone reflects your interests and personality back to you, making you feel understood. Fractured mirroring is more sinister. They show you pieces of what you want to see, but never the complete picture. They reflect your desires, but only in controlled doses. They show vulnerability for a moment, then cover it up with humor. They demonstrate intensity briefly, then retreat into calculated coldness. Your mind becomes obsessed with completing the puzzle, but they're making sure you never quite get all the pieces. Think about it. Have you ever felt like you almost understood someone? Like you were on the verge of truly knowing them, but something always held you back from that final level of connection? That's fractured mirroring in action. Subscribe if you're starting to see the patterns, because what comes next reveals the most disturbing technique of all. The third method is memory manipulation. They don't just influence how you see them in the present, they literally rewrite your past interactions. They'll reference a look you supposedly gave them, a moment that supposedly happened between you, even if it never occurred the way they describe it. Your brain is remarkably plastic. When someone confidently references a shared experience with emotional intensity, your mind often accepts it as real, even filling in details that support their version of events. They become more magical, more significant in your personal history than they actually were. But here's where it gets truly psychological. They create what I call suspended mythology. They talk about future possibilities, places you'll visit together, experiences you'll share, but they never commit to any of it. They paint vivid pictures of what could be, then strategically withdraw, leaving these potential futures hanging in your mind like emotional hooks. You start living in a story that hasn't happened yet, obsessing over possibilities that may never materialize. Your brain treats these imagined futures as if they're real goals that have been threatened, triggering intense fear of loss. And that brings us to the final and most powerful technique, manufactured fear of loss. Once they've made you emotionally invested, once you've started to see them as special, as different from everyone else, they begin to subtly suggest that your connection is fragile. They don't threaten to leave directly. Instead, they make comments like, "I hope you don't become like everyone else," or "People usually disappoint me in the end." They make you feel like you have to earn the privilege of their attention, like you could lose access to them at any moment. Your brain interprets this as a threat to something valuable, and your behavior changes accordingly. You start monitoring your own actions, trying to be the version of yourself that keeps them interested. You're no longer just attracted to them, you're terrified of losing them. Comment right now if you're recognizing these patterns in your own life, because understanding this is the first step to breaking free from someone else's psychological control. But here's what makes this truly disturbing. The people who use these techniques aren't necessarily doing it consciously. Some learn these behaviors from their own trauma, their own experiences of being manipulated. They recreate patterns that were used on them, spreading psychological manipulation like a virus through relationships. Others, however, study these techniques deliberately. They understand exactly what they're doing to your brain, and they do it anyway because it gives them power, control, and emotional supply from multiple people simultaneously. So how do you protect yourself? How do you recognize when someone is using these techniques on you before you become completely psychologically dependent on them? First, pay attention to your own behavior patterns. If you find yourself constantly checking your phone for one specific person, if you're analyzing their messages for hidden meanings, if you're changing your behavior to try to maintain their interest, you're being manipulated. Second, notice the emotional roller coaster. Healthy relationships have ups and downs, but they don't make you feel like you're constantly walking on eggshells or trying to solve an impossible puzzle. If someone consistently makes you question where you stand with them, that's not mysterious or romantic. It's psychological manipulation. Third, observe how they handle your emotional wounds. Do they actually help you heal and grow stronger, or do they just make you feel better temporarily while keeping you dependent on their presence for relief? But understanding these techniques isn't just about protection. It's about recognizing the power you have to influence others and the responsibility that comes with that power. Every interaction you have with another person affects their brain chemistry. Every text you send or don't send, every response you give or withhold, every level of availability you choose, it all impacts how others think and feel about you. The question is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? Are you going to use these techniques to manipulate others, creating cycles of emotional dependency and psychological control? Or are you going to use your understanding to build healthier relationships based on genuine connection rather than manufactured obsession? The choice reveals something fundamental about your character, and it will determine the quality of every relationship you have for the rest of your life. Here's something most people don't realize. When you use manipulative techniques to create obsession, you're not actually being chosen for who you are. You're being chosen because someone's brain chemistry has been hijacked. That's not love, it's not genuine attraction, and it's not sustainable. Real connection happens when someone sees you clearly, understands your flaws and strengths, and chooses to be with you anyway. That's infinitely more valuable than manufactured obsession, but it requires you to be vulnerable, authentic, and willing to risk rejection. The people who rely on manipulation techniques to create attraction are usually the ones most afraid of being truly known. They've convinced themselves that their authentic self isn't lovable enough, so they resort to psychological tricks to maintain interest and control. But here's the irony. By manipulating others into obsession, they ensure that they'll never experience genuine love. They become addicted to the power of control rather than the vulnerability of connection. If you're someone who's been using these techniques, either consciously or unconsciously, I want you to consider something. What would it feel like to be chosen by someone who sees you completely, who understands your fears and insecurities, and who decides to love you anyway? That's what you're depriving yourself of every time you choose manipulation over authenticity. And if you're someone who's been the target of these techniques, who's found yourself obsessing over people who keep you in emotional uncertainty, I want you to understand something crucial. Your worth is not determined by whether someone chooses to give you consistent attention. You don't need to solve the puzzle of another person's feelings to be valuable. You don't need to earn someone's consistent kindness. You don't need to prove that you're worthy of basic respect and clear communication. The right people for you won't make you question your worth or walk on eggshells to maintain their interest. They'll see your value, immediately and consistently choose to honor it. But breaking free from these patterns isn't easy, especially if you've been caught in cycles of manufactured obsession for years. Your brain has been trained to interpret uncertainty as excitement, to mistake emotional chaos for passion, to confuse being chosen by someone unavailable with being special. Comment below with your biggest takeaway from this video, because recognizing these patterns is the first step toward healthier relationships. The recovery process involves retraining your brain to appreciate consistency over uncertainty, to value people who make you feel secure rather than people who make you feel crazy, to choose partners based on how they treat you when they're not trying to impress you. It means learning to sit with the discomfort of genuine vulnerability instead of the familiar chaos of psychological games. It means accepting that real love might feel boring compared to manufactured obsession, at least initially, because your brain has been conditioned to associate drama with passion. But here's what happens when you make this shift. You start attracting people who are also interested in genuine connection rather than psychological control. Your relationships become sources of strength rather than emotional drain. You stop spending mental energy trying to decode mixed messages and start investing that energy in personal growth and authentic connection. The people who are meant to be in your life won't make you work this hard to understand where you stand with them. Now I want to address something that might be making you uncomfortable. As you've been listening to this, you might have recognized some of these techniques in your own behavior. You might have realized that you've been unconsciously manipulating others, creating uncertainty and emotional dependency in people who cared about you. If that's the case, don't panic. Most people engage in some level of these behaviors without realizing it, especially if they learned them in childhood or previous relationships. The important thing is what you do with this awareness now. The first step is acknowledging the pattern without judgment. You learn these behaviors for a reason, likely as a way to protect yourself from rejection or abandonment. They served a purpose at some point in your life, but they're probably not serving you well now. The second step is committing to change, even when it feels scary. Giving up psychological control means accepting that some people might choose to leave your life, and that's terrifying if you've been using manipulation to maintain relationships. But here's what you'll discover. The relationships you maintain through authenticity are infinitely more satisfying than the ones you maintain through control. When someone chooses you repeatedly without being psychologically manipulated into it, that choice means something real. Let me share something that might change your perspective entirely. The most magnetic people aren't the ones who use these manipulation techniques. They're the ones who are so comfortable with themselves that they don't need to create artificial scarcity or emotional uncertainty. They're interesting because they have rich inner lives, genuine passions, and authentic confidence. They're attractive because they're not trying to be attractive. They're focused on becoming the best version of themselves and sharing that authentically with others. These people create what I call natural magnetism rather than manufactured obsession. People are drawn to them not because their brain chemistry has been hijacked, but because they feel genuinely good in their presence. The difference is profound. Manufactured obsession creates emotional dependency and psychological unrest. Natural magnetism creates inspiration and genuine desire for connection. Which type of person do you want to be? Which type of energy do you want to bring into the world? Subscribe if you're committed to choosing authenticity over manipulation, because the content I create is designed to help you become genuinely magnetic rather than artificially controlling. Here's your homework for this week. I want you to practice radical honesty in your relationships. Instead of creating uncertainty, be clear about your feelings and intentions. Instead of withholding information to maintain power, share your thoughts openly. Instead of being strategically unavailable, be genuinely present when you choose to engage with others. This might feel terrifying at first. Your brain might interpret this directness as weakness or loss of control. Some people might lose interest when you stop playing psychological games with them. And that's actually good news, because it means they were only interested in the drama, not in you. But others will respond with relief and appreciation. They'll feel safe with you in a way they haven't felt safe with others. They'll trust you more quickly because your communication is consistent and clear. They'll choose you repeatedly because being around you feels peaceful rather than chaotic. The goal isn't to become boring or predictable. The goal is to become trustworthy and emotionally secure, which are the foundations of every healthy relationship. Comment below with one way you're going to practice more authenticity in your relationships this week. Your commitment might inspire someone else to make the same choice. Now let's talk about something that might surprise you. How to recognize when you're in a healthy relationship versus one built on manufactured obsession. In healthy relationships, you feel more like yourself, not less. You feel encouraged to pursue your own interests, maintain your friendships, and continue growing as an individual. The other person enhances your life without becoming your entire life. In relationships built on manufactured obsession, you feel like you're constantly performing, trying to maintain interest, walking on eggshells to avoid triggering withdrawal of attention. You lose touch with your own interests and friends because all your mental energy is focused on maintaining this one connection. Healthy relationships make you feel secure enough to be vulnerable. Manufactured obsession makes you feel like vulnerability is dangerous because it might be used against you later. In healthy relationships, communication is consistent and clear. You don't spend hours analyzing text messages or trying to decode mixed signals. When there's confusion, you can address it directly and receive honest answers. In manufactured obsession, communication is deliberately confusing. Mixed messages are common, and when you try to address confusion, you're often made to feel like you're being too sensitive or reading too much into things. Here's a crucial question. Do the people in your life make you feel crazy, or do they make you feel sane? This might be the most important relationship diagnostic you ever learn. People who are good for you make you feel more grounded, more confident in your own perceptions, more trusting of your own judgment. People who use manipulation techniques make you doubt yourself, question your memory, and feel unstable in your own emotional experience. If someone consistently makes you feel like you might be overreacting, too sensitive or misunderstanding situations, that's a red flag. Trust your instincts about how you feel in someone's presence, even if you can't articulate exactly why something feels off. Your emotional experience is valid information, and people who are genuinely good for you won't make you question your own sanity or emotional intelligence. Now, I want to share something that might be difficult to hear, but it's crucial for your emotional health. If you're currently obsessed with someone who's been using these techniques on you, the obsession itself is preventing you from seeing the situation clearly. When your brain is caught in cycles of intermittent reinforcement and manufactured uncertainty, you lose the ability to evaluate the relationship objectively. You start making excuses for behavior that you would never accept from anyone else. You convince yourself that the emotional chaos is passion, that the uncertainty is mystery, that the psychological games are proof of how special and unique your connection is. But obsession isn't love. Obsession is a form of addiction, and like any addiction, it impairs your judgment and decision-making ability. Breaking free requires the same strategies used to overcome other addictions: distance, time, support systems, and often professional help. It requires acknowledging that your brain chemistry has been altered and that your feelings, while real, may not be reflecting the actual quality or potential of the relationship. This doesn't mean your feelings aren't valid. It means they've been artificially intensified by psychological manipulation, and you need time and space to let your brain chemistry return to baseline before you can make clear decisions about this person. If you're in this situation right now, please consider reaching out to a therapist, counselor, or trusted friend who can provide objective perspective. Don't try to navigate this alone, especially if the relationship has been going on for months or years. Comment below if you need support in breaking free from a manipulative relationship. Sometimes just acknowledging the pattern publicly is the first step toward change. Let me address one more thing that's crucial for your understanding: why some people become targets for these manipulation techniques while others seem immune to them. It's not about intelligence, attractiveness, or worth. It's usually about psychological vulnerabilities that developed early in life. People who experienced inconsistent love and attention as children often have brain patterns that make them susceptible to intermittent reinforcement in adult relationships. If your early caregivers were sometimes loving and sometimes distant, sometimes attentive and sometimes neglectful, your brain learned to work harder for uncertain rewards. You develop neural pathways that interpret inconsistency as normal and consistency as boring. This isn't your fault, and it doesn't make you weak or damaged. It makes you human. Most people have some level of these vulnerabilities because most people experience some level of inconsistent caregiving. The important thing is recognizing these patterns so you can make conscious choices about your relationships rather than being driven by unconscious programming. Healing involves slowly retraining your brain to appreciate consistency, to trust people who make you feel secure, and to recognize that healthy love doesn't require you to constantly prove your worth. It's a process, and it takes time. Be patient with yourself as you learn to prefer peace over chaos, security over uncertainty, and authentic connection over manufactured drama. Your past experiences don't determine your future relationships unless you let them. With awareness and intentional effort, you can break cycles that have been running your love life for years or even decades. Now let's talk about how to use this knowledge to build genuinely fulfilling relationships going forward. First, focus on becoming the type of person you want to attract. If you want someone who's emotionally stable, work on your own emotional regulation. If you want someone who's authentic, practice radical honesty in your own communication. If you want someone who's secure, develop your own sense of self-worth that doesn't depend on external validation. This isn't about becoming perfect, it's about becoming conscious. When you understand your own psychological patterns and triggers, you're less likely to project them onto others or to be manipulated by people who exploit them. Second, learn to recognize and appreciate green flags rather than just avoiding red flags. Green flags include consistent communication, respect for your boundaries, encouragement of your individual growth, integration into their existing life rather than compartmentalization, and emotional regulation during conflicts. People with green flags might seem boring at first if you're used to psychological drama, but they're the ones who create the stable foundation for genuine intimacy and long-term happiness. Third, practice setting boundaries early and often. Boundaries aren't walls, they're guidelines that help healthy people interact with you in ways that work for both of you. People who respect your boundaries are safe people. People who push against them, try to negotiate them, or make you feel guilty for having them are showing you exactly who they are. The right people for you will appreciate your boundaries because they want you to feel safe and respected in the relationship. Finally, trust the process of getting to know someone slowly. Real compatibility reveals itself over time through various life situations, challenges, and everyday interactions. People who try to rush intimacy or create artificial intensity are often trying to bypass the natural getting to know you process for a reason. Take your time, ask questions, pay attention to how they treat service workers, how they talk about their exes, how they handle stress, how they respond when you're not at your best. These are much better indicators of relationship potential than emotional intensity or manufactured chemistry. Subscribe if this video has helped you understand the difference between authentic connection and psychological manipulation, because creating content like this is my way of fighting back against the manipulation techniques that are destroying people's ability to form healthy relationships. Before we wrap up, I want to address one final question that's probably on your mind. What if you've been using these techniques and you want to stop, but you're afraid that being authentic will make you less attractive to others? This fear is understandable, especially if manipulation has been your primary strategy for maintaining relationships. But here's what you need to understand. The people you lose by being authentic were never truly choosing you anyway. They were choosing the psychological stimulation you provided, the drama, the uncertainty, the emotional roller coaster. When you become authentic, you might lose people who were addicted to chaos, but you'll start attracting people who are looking for genuine connection. The quality of your relationships will improve dramatically, even if the quantity initially decreases. And here's something beautiful that happens when you choose authenticity over manipulation. You start to trust that you're lovable for who you really are. You stop living with the constant fear that people will leave if they see the real you, because the people in your life chose you knowing exactly who you are. That kind of security is worth losing a dozen manipulative connections. That kind of peace is worth the initial discomfort of changing your relationship patterns. Your assignment for this week is simple but challenging. Have one completely honest conversation with someone important in your life. Share something real about yourself without trying to control their response. Let them see you clearly and trust that if they're the right person for you, they'll appreciate your authenticity. Comment below with how that conversation goes. Your courage might inspire someone else to make the same choice. The techniques I've shared today aren't just academic knowledge, they're tools for transformation. Use them to recognize manipulation when it's happening to you. Use them to examine your own patterns and make healthier choices. Use them to build relationships based on genuine connection rather than psychological control. But most importantly, use them to become the type of person who doesn't need to manipulate others to feel loved and chosen. Become someone so comfortable with your authentic self that you attract people through genuine magnetism rather than manufactured obsession. The world needs more people who choose love over fear, authenticity over manipulation, and genuine connection over psychological control. By making these choices in your own life, you're not just improving your relationships, you're contributing to a culture of healthier human connection. If this video has opened your eyes to patterns in your own life, if it's helped you understand why certain relationships felt so confusing or intense, if it's given you tools to build healthier connections going forward, then please share it with someone who needs to hear this message. The techniques I've exposed today are being used on people everywhere, in dating apps, social media, workplaces, and family systems. The more people who understand these patterns, the less power they have to control and manipulate. Knowledge is power, but only if you use it wisely. Choose to use what you've learned today to create more love, trust, and authentic connection in the world. Thank you for watching, and remember, you deserve relationships that make you feel secure, valued, and genuinely loved for who you are. Don't settle for psychological games when you could have authentic connection. Until next time, choose authenticity over obsession, and trust that the right people will choose you back.